Yo, what's popping? We have the first Power Rankings Monday of the Countdown Cup qualifiers. Above me are my Power Rankings from just after the Summer Showdown tournament. Some of that not holding up too well, but you know what? It'd be boring if it was. So, glad they aren't in some aspects. I'm also very upset that they aren't in other aspects. But, yeah, so I'm going to start off with the East, but before I get there and talk about how tragic the Spark are, spoiler, like this video if you like it. Subscribe for more daily Overwatch League content. Share this video with anyone who might be interested in these power rankings. And comment down below, where I went wrong, where I went right, any egregious takes I have, things like that. And yeah, so getting on to this Hangzhou Spark and how bad they are. God damn, in their last 8 matches, they are 1-7. Like, unreal compared to how they started this season in the first 2 stages. They looked like, in my opinion, they were the best after the midseason madness, and it's just a nosedive from there. And you say, oh, one stage, that's not too bad. They have an off stage and do really poorly. Not the worst thing, but then they say their support line has lost confidence or something, and they like just replace them, which isn't going to help their confidence very much, but whatever. Pretty much ruin that for maybe the rest of the season. You bring in Neko and Teru. Teru, actually, not that bad. I think he probably might have been an upgrade over Irony, because he was holding his own. He's hitting some good sleeps, some good nades there, living quite well at times. But man, Neko is probably the worst player to play in the East region. I can't think of anyone that was worse than him in the entire weekend. Like, straight up awful. And they just ran with him again after a excruciating loss against the Hunters. They just run him back against the Fusion. It's not all doom and gloom for the Spark, because you still have Shy, and he's able to get you some map wins. He gets you 2 map wins basically, but you can't rely on Shy forever, especially if you're going to put him on the Sombra. It's just not going to work out. Alfie hasn't really been back to form, it feels like, ever since he came to China. Something just not quite clicking there. And another big question mark I have is, why are you playing Gushue 24/7? You could play the Zarya comp. We saw them have success on it in the kickoff clash. You could argue they were the best Zarya comp in the East region in the first stage there. So it's just weird to me that they don't bring it back whenever you see the Fusion getting some success on that, the Charge almost exclusively playing it, even the Valiant and getting some good plays off of it. It's just weird to me that you don't give that a shot whenever it's just not really working out with Gushue. I don't know. This team has there are things to look at and say, it could be better, but I don't know if it could be much worse with what you have. Shy is always going to perform, so him as a constant make this team they bottom out. I would expect. I don't think it can get much worse than this. Above them going to be their arch nemesis, the Philadelphia Fusion. Fusion get the win over them 3-1, but do lose to the Valiant 3-2. So Valiant are above them as they have to be. But honestly, these middle 5 teams, other than the top and the bottom of this region, it's decently close. I'd say, I could see Fusion beating anyone at any time, because their DPS just have that pop-off potential. Especially now that you bring in a more stable composition with the Zarya Reaper comp, that Philly kind of play a little bit differently than the rest of the region. It feels like Zest, very good at just walking into the backline and killing them, whereas you see Jimmy was struggling to do that, Choice A1 struggling to do that on the Charge, and just no one else really has that same energy. It feels like the Zarya has been the main driving force with that composition, but for the Fusion, it's more Zest on that Reaper, which is a breath of fresh air, and it's a little bit different. I'm not sure if it's as good, but it definitely is different, and there's some big potential there. Unfortunately, their backline, I think, is still holding them back a bit. Fixa and Neko were going on a bottom main support off that they had over there, so it was kind of rough. But it's a Philly Fusion. It's the same old, same old. Your DPS can carry you, and Fury is better than he was, so they have even better chance to carry because there's less weight now. And they didn't look great with Belostria. I know they played a little bit of ball, I think, and things like that, and it didn't really work out. But it's not all lost, and they can definitely punch up quite a bit still. But above them is actually going to be the Shanghai Dragons, so win a tournament into bottom 3 in your region. So I was debating putting them... I'll talk about the Valiant here too, because I was debating putting them above the Valiant, but the more I think about it, right, the Dragons get rolled by Shanghai, well, not quite. The Dragons get rolled by the Dynasty, and they look a little bit close in that first map with Fleta on the Echo, but other than that, it was kind of a roll, and then you lose to the Charge, and it felt like it wasn't like even the maps they won, it wasn't Shanghai winning, it was the Charge losing. Like they were playing Zarya and struggling on the Reaper to control any high ground, so it was just impossible to displace Lip, who was still the GOAT. Lip has been the only player consistently performing on the Dragons now that Who Are You is gone, at least this stage. And it just felt like they didn't actually get those map wins. They just didn't lose them. And I have to question, if the Charge even have a little bit of a diva comp on them, if they even dabble in it at all, do they get those wins? Is it more of a 3-0 for the Charge, or at least a 3-1 or something like that? Because they looked really bad, even whenever the Charge put the pigskin on. Like, it was pretty tragic there. So I have some big questions with Shanghai. And going over to the Valiant, because they put them on the board here as well, they also get rolled by Seoul, but it was honestly closer. And that made me like doubt Seoul for a bit. I'm like, well, the Valiant made it close, but then Shanghai got blown out of the water. And with Valiant being able to beat Philly, bring in Marvel, and not playing Sasan as much, which I think is a fantastic decision that they've made to not just play that Zarya comp the full time. And because Marvel is so flexible, to utilize that flexibility are in a much better place. But we saw Becky have probably his best performances to date on a weekend, and Easy Han played quite well too. Molly played insane. Valiant seemed to be peaking, not the right time because it might be too late for them to actually make a run into the play-ins. But they're peaking at the end here, and the Dragons are just bottomed out. So I feel like if you play the Valiant against the Dragons, at least at the strength level that they were last weekend, I take the Valiant, like genuinely. Because I just think they have way more flexibility, way more pop-off potential today. Because, I don't know, other than Lip, like the Dragons were very flat. And I'm honestly expecting them to bring in Who Are You, or I hope they do, to give them a little bit of an X factor, a bit more pop. Because if you have Lip and Who Are You carrying, hopefully the rest of the team rises to the occasion, because they are good, talented players. They're just not clicking right now. It's a little different from the Fusion, where if the Shanghai Dragons DPS pop off, I think that the rest of the team will rise to the occasion, where it's just not happening on the Fusion. So that's a key difference there as well. Above them is going to be the Guangzhou Charge, and they only played the Zarya pretty much. They played a little bit of like a reset. They play a little bit of Sigma on the Circuit Royale, a little bit of the Pigskin, but they look pretty damn good at it. I think that they do need to have the Diva, because, Piggy can play the Diva. There's no reason not to at least practice that composition on points like King's Row C or Dorado B whenever you're attacking, because you just can't control the high ground and you're going to lose to the enemy hit scan. No matter how good Choice A1 is, because Choice A1 was phenomenal this weekend with the Blades. Even on points like that, where Piggy really wasn't getting any value on the Zarya with the damage he was putting out, you were able to get multiple fight wins string together just by Choice A1 being that guy. Good nano blades, even raw blades. You just don't even need the nano. You can beat blade him and he'll get the value. So that gives the Charge another dynamic edge to their composition. But they can go further. I think they need to get out of their comfort zone a little bit to really propel themselves forward. But they look pretty damn good, and I'm very excited to watch them. One of the most exciting teams to watch right now, just because of like the story that they had coming together. And now that you have Jimmy doing well too with Source A1, they look almost unstoppable at times. However, they did lose to the Chengdu Hunters, and Chengdu looked dangerous. And the thing about Chengdu that surprises me the most is I don't think Leave was their best player. And like Leave not being your best player, not even like your second best player. Monk had an unreal weekend. Jinmu was popping off consistently, and it's always a question: well, can they keep it up? Because they've had times like this, even last stage, where like Chengdu Hunters look like a top 3 team. They look extremely talented right now, and it's all working out. But then they bottom out, don't get a single win in that final week that they needed to secure a spot into the tournament. So can they keep it up? Is always the question with Chengdu. But it feels a little different here, because it's not like Leave is popping off, which is letting them like excel. It's like Leave is like an afterthought with this team right now, with how good Jimu is, with how much the backline is doing. And they were living for so long. The peel that was coming out was like crazy. And Daisy comes in as an X factor as well, and he plays great on the Sigma, much better than I thought. Like, we haven't seen him all too much, but his Sigma gameplay was quite incredible. He was keeping right up with Piggy or excelling. It was really something to watch. But if Chengdu get Leave like at his peak at the same time, they can actually threaten the Seoul Dynasty for the top spot, I think. Because the Seoul Dynasty, like, what is it? Like, they look incredible. They look really good, but honestly, I think they've looked better. I think it's much closer from the top to Chengdu than you would expect. Because yeah, they went 6-0, but I don't know. If I think they could have been a bit more dominant in some aspects. Like whenever they play it up against a Valiant, yes, they win pretty handedly, but it was still close, and it felt like Valiant were outplaying them on some maps. So Soul's like their biggest thing right now is like the consistency, the flexibility that Smurf gives them that they have in their roster. The little I think Iris had a pretty good time, but even better against the Dragons than the Valiant. But yeah, Soul just so consistent, so flexible with what they can do because Smurf lets them do everything. By far the most flexible tank in the league. I don't think it's a question. And elite at so many different tanks that he's never a question mark. Ever, I would say. You have Prophet doing his thing and Fitz doing his thing also. So it's just like it's just the consistency that Soul Dynasty brings. Always brings them at another level compared to other teams. Like yeah, Valiant did look better. Like Becky had better pop off performances than Fitz than Prophet even at times. I would say in their what's the word, match? I couldn't think of the word match. That's crazy. But with how consistent Soul are, it doesn't matter because overall the level of play is higher. So I don't think they're like as super dominant. They're not like Shanghai Dragons last stage. It's not that level, but they definitely have set themselves a little bit above the pack right now. But going over to the West, we have at the very bottom, to no one's surprise, the Paris Eternal. But to be fair to them, they did play much better than I would have expected them to. Yeah, you know what? They take a map off London and they get rolled by Dallas. But it's not awful. Cry actually looks serviceable, I would say. The backline looks pretty good also at times. I don't know. It is hard. It's hard to make up like reasons that they're really good because you can't. They're not there. But like they're able to get that win off of London on Dorado. That's something. It's not nothing. And I think maybe they could find a win against like some of the lower rated teams on here. But I think they have a pretty tough like schedule also, if I remember correctly. So it's just rough for Paris, man. They're doing what they can, but like quickly looking, they play Houston, Vancouver next, and then Boston Shock. Like Vancouver might be winnable, you could argue, but it's a bit rough for Paris still. I think if Paris maybe commit to that Orisa that they played a bit better, because Cry on the Orisa, like on Dorado specifically, controlling the high ground very well and kind of shutting down London's attacks, even though they had Backbone on the Widow doing things. It actually worked out for them pretty well. But the Diva, I said it's serviceable, but with how much he was getting exploited with hacks and antis, it's not much better than serviceable. It's better than it's like same level as Doge, so take that as you will. Bad, I would say. But you know what? It's not all bad because above them, I'm putting the Vancouver Titans. I'm taking them down from as high up as they were because like they just that's a little okay. Let me do that. Yeah, okay. But because with Vancouver, I don't know, it just didn't come together. You have Aspire doing some things. They get a map win over London in kind of similar way there, but it's like it's just not there. Mirror's not able to get the value that he was getting on the Junker Queen anymore. Aspire on the Sojourn's not enough to carry this team out. King on the Sombra is doing some things, but I've seen better. It's something's not clicking with this team still, and yeah, it's just so rough because they have definitely noticeably improved, but so have all the other teams around them. So I think they kind of took a step down here from the last stage. I don't think it's like horrible for Vancouver because you saw them get some wins. You saw them have some close matches against London, close maps. It's just like some little things there, like the C9 and Pariso. They end up losing out against the Reinhardt with the Orisa on Colosseo because they were kind of not playing it as well as London, where London were much more were much less forgiving when it came to getting progress, where Vancouver was much more free to let London get some extra progress, and that kind of bit them in the end. And then there's also the thing where like they're not even playing false on Junkertown. They're opting to play like Doomfist. So they clearly don't believe in False's gameplay at all to play Doomfist on Junkertown. Not even a ball, just a straight up Doomfist with Mirror. There's so many holes in this roster, and they just don't have means of really fixing them or even like getting around them, closing them up, plugging them a bit. It's just I think they have some good potential, but it's not it's not going to be enough going forward, I think. But above them is going to be the New York Excelsior. So New York, the only reason they're ahead is because you have Yaki and Flora, who, as we saw against the Defiant, they get a little bit of momentum going, they get some swagger going, they'll just take over a game. They hit the reverse sweep, and from there it's a GG. Now against London, Yaki didn't really show up. Flora did, but Yaki didn't, so they fall flat-footed and they lose. It's like the Philly Fusion, but on a much lower scale because the ceiling isn't as high and the floor is much lower. But they also have some questions there with like you're not playing Anson J maybe as much as you could. I understand maybe you like the flex support with Ho One and Genninjin, but I think bringing in Ansun J might benefit at some points. But mostly, literally, the only reason they're above the Titans is because they have that potential to go crazy with Yaki and Flora. And if next week, if Yaki and Flora don't pop off either of their days, Vancouver will go right ahead because I think Vancouver are a bit better as a team. They have a better idea of what they're doing. They have a better capability to improve. But right now, I think New York had a better showing just because Yaki and Flora ended up popping off, and they looked pretty bad for the first two maps against Toronto too, and then they just turned it on. So it's hard to say. Maybe you could argue Vancouver above them. I think it's very reasonable, but we'll see. Anyway, above New York is going to be the team they reverse swept to Toronto Defiant. I was going to put them below New York, but I simply could not do it. Toronto played a much better game against Atlanta, and they don't rely solely on Yaki popping off with Flora. That's two individual pop-off plays that they need. But there are some crazy questions like Hisu on the Sombra with the Zarya. I like it, but you can't play it this much. You can't force it that much. You see teams even like the Charge, they don't full play the Sombra. They play it a little bit, but they don't fully play it. They'll bring in the Sojourn and stuff like that. And with how integral Hisu is to this team's success, you need to put him onto the carry roles. And yes, his Sombra is probably one of the best historically in NA, but right now you need some extra oomph from him for your team to actually find success. And then there's some other question marks, like you bring in Aldo to play Tracer for some reason instead of Finale. Not sure what that was about. That's just not what you've been doing. On Dorado, of all places, he doesn't swap off. What's going on there? I don't know. Then there's the whole thing where they just straight up mentally collapsed against New York after they lost two maps. You saw them just locking Moira. Twilight could not handle it. And we've seen that before in previously where Twilight would say, fuck it, I'm going Ana or I'm going Moira or whatever the hell he wanted. So that's a big problem there as well, where they seem to be kind of easily boomed whenever they get into those like matches that they really shouldn't lose, and they end up losing them. So they're boomable as well. But we saw them have a really good peak as a franchise just 2 weeks ago. So can they bounce back? Do they have the coaching staff to do it? We'll see. I think it's possible, but they have to stay perfectly mid, right? But above them is going to be the London Spitfire. So London, yeah. They did get 2 wins, but it was over Paris and Vancouver, where I rated bottom 2. And I have some big question marks in this roster. So you're playing Shax and Backbone predominantly, with Sparker riding the bench. I have some big problems with that. I think Sparker has been your main carry player. And putting him on the bench really lowers the ceiling of this team. Shax, while he played like a solid game, he hasn't been like super popping off, taking over games and competing against the best Tracers. He's been going toe to toe with Aspire. He's been significantly better than Malthel. That's not really a massive W though, He's not even. I wouldn't say he was going toe to toe with Aspire. He was a bit below Aspire. Aspire had some pop off moments, and he didn't really have those. Backbone on the Widowmaker coming out on multiple maps, a bit of a surprise. And he's doing quite well. But if we compare him to the normal Widowmaker standards that we have in this league, is he even average? I think he probably was, but also against lower level teams again. So he's not putting up Hisu level performances or things like that. So there are some big questions there as well. But Khan has been integrated very nicely into the roster. He's had some pop off moments. They're not playing the Reinhardt. I don't know if I agree with it yet, but I guess they're not going to try it. So they don't have that over teams anymore either. I don't think they're bad. I just think middle of NA is such a mess right now that they just end up being bottom 5 because of it. Because directly above them is going to be the Florida Mayhem. And the thing with Florida, yeah, you know what? They are 0-2. They lose to Gladiators. They lose to Boston. And that's that. But they kind of had a bunch of different looks. Against the Gladiators, their lethal dive with Hydron was extremely good, and the Gladiators were just able to overcome that. But that doesn't change the fact that they were super lethal. Checkmate was popping off. Hydron had some great moments with the dives. He's setting up the engagements perfectly. And someone capitalizing on them being very aggressive on the Winston really made their matchings to Gladiators actually quite close. But then you go over to the Boston Uprising. Boston played the Diva, and Florida decided, you know what, we're just going to play the Zarya as kind of a way to counter that. And it doesn't really work out. So I just think they're not really as much as a Zarya team. Yeah, someone can be serviceable on the Zarya, but he's not really that level of Zarya that you see these other teams have that are playing it. He's not as good as Hoppa has been, even though Toronto, haven't had the most success. He's not nearly as good as Han been, even over on the Eastern side. He's not as good as Piggy and things like that. Yeah, he can get the job done, but Zarya kind of needs to be the focal point of that comp unless your name is Zest in the Philly Fusion. So I'd like to see them maybe tone that back a bit. I'd like to see if someone has a diva on him to try and match up that way instead. Or maybe just try and figure out the Zarya a bit more, be a bit more aggressive, and not let your team kind of crumble around you as much. There's definitely potential here. I'd like to see them play the Sombra Winston a bit more than the Zarya, but we'll see what they do moving forward. Now we have the Atlanta Reign. So Atlanta, you know what? They do get 2 nice wins. They get the win over Toronto 3-2. They get the win over New York 3-0. It's an absolute domination against New York. Like, New York had some fight wins. They win more fights than, like, Paris do against Dallas or Vancouver do against the Gladiators. They capture multiple points, get all the way to the end of Circuit Royale, things like that. But it was all in all, Atlanta ran, like, sweet, like, solid domination, I would say. Vigilante and UV make a absolutely lethal double flex support lineup because they're both so talented on it. Venom on the Tracer is able to come back in. It speedily looks pretty good as well, especially on the Echo when he's able to play that on like Ilios Well, maps like that. Atlanta looked like a real threat, but there is some but there. And it's just that I don't know. I just don't see the super plays coming out of them. Like there are the teams above them. I just feel like have a little bit of extra oomph going on right now, and there's also some question marks still. Yeah, I don't know. Atlanta's kind of hard to play. So is all of NA. This is such a weird time to try and do one of these, but this meta swap has things all up in the air. I think the biggest thing is I just want to see a little bit more from them before I put them higher. It's not that like I haven't shown anything to not put them higher, but you defeat Toronto, who don't look that good, and it's really close. And then you roll New York. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like they need a little bit more results, especially after the kind of subpar stage they had to really put them higher. But they definitely have the potential. It's not so much holding them back. It's just that nothing's holding them up, But above them is going to be the Boston Uprising. This is the highest I think I've placed Boston, as much as I have tried to push for them pretty much this entire season. Boston, they look great. They actually look great. Punk is in at full force. He can get the job done on the Diva, even into the Zarya, as I talked about against Florida. He navigated that matchup super well. And just Boston as a whole did as well. Because you have Crimzo on the Zenyatta. MCD on the Zenyatta. Oh my. MCD just pounded so much. I don't know. Maybe some motivation there in some ways. But like, crazy stuff from them, especially in that Houston matchup. And you notice that I do have Houston above them, even though they beat Boston. Even though Boston beat them, they were really taking advantage of Doge to the max. And I think that they just have such a good handle on how to play against the tank matchups. He gets perma hacked, perma rolled, and just how they played against Florida again is really impressed me. And then you have Victoria and Valentine both looked very impressive. Valentine staying consistent as always, but Victoria, I thought he lost his job to Seeker, but he really steps up on the Sombra, has some good looks on the hit scan, and Boston looked like the sky's the limit almost. Now maybe not that extreme, but they have the flexibility, they have the potential. They don't have any glaring weakness in the roster, I would say. It's looking quite good for them. And then we have the Washington Justice. So Washington actually going up pretty high. And my thing about Washington, yeah, they lose to Dallas, but so does literally everyone else. And then they beat the Shock. Huge win over the Shock. But you'll notice the Shock is still above them. Well, that's because of their win. While it was good, it was against Mikey 4 out of 5 maps. And I don't rate Mikey very much. I'm going to be honest. That being said, they did play against the ball very well. Kalios showing that he isn't just all aggression on the off tanks. You know, he's able to peel very well for the back line and let Assassin and Decay do their own work onto the Shock back line. And just, you know what their roster is always going to be, but Kalios showed that he can be really flexible. He can play so many different things. The Orisa's there, the Diva's there, the Zarya's there. It's all there. And they were like the first team to really bring the Orisa out. And I mean, they were the second match, so that's not too much. It didn't look too good, but against Dallas, no one does. So I think this team, with how Kalios is playing, the kind of aggression that they're feeling out, yeah, sometimes they over-aggress and they lose. Sometimes they under-aggress still. But at least we have a happy medium at some points. Before, it's either their last stage, all-out over-aggression, and then the other previous stages, the classic Washington under-aggression, too passive. They seem to actually be learning and having a middle ground. And honestly, I think this team could go places, but it's the Washington Justice, so I'm not going to get my hopes up too high, because next week they could go out and they could lose to New York, because of course they could. That's just Washington. But I was quite impressed. And above them, for number 4, is actually going to be the Shock. Yes, they did lose to Washington. Yes, they did lose to Houston. But hear me out, okay? That Washington loss, 3-2, extremely close. Mikey in 4 maps, loses 2 of them. Kaluj gets his map win. Loses 3 of them. Kaluj gets his map win. I think if Kaluj is in, they ditch the Mikey ball. It's not a good strategy. Way too inflexible. Not even that good at it anyway. If you bring Kaluj in, that might be a way closer match. Maybe Washington still win. I'm not going to deny that. But I think that for sure, Kaluj has the flexibility. He can play whatever you want, except the ball probably. I still think his monkey is as good as Mikey's at worst. So I don't really see the issue there. They were a team that was very happy to run the Diva before everyone else was anyway. So I'm not entirely sure why you're not committing to that nearly as much as you were right off the rip. And sure, they lose against Houston. And the biggest problem here between both these matches was that Sam's EMPs were not really there. That he wasn't focusing and setting up this engagement quite as well as most of these other Sombras that are above them. Even some below them, like Hydron is setting up the engagement much better than Sam. But despite Proper not being 100%, not fully healthy, Shocker's still a pretty good team that I would say match up quite well against most of the mid-table teams. Sure, you can lose to Washington, you can lose to Houston, but I think both of those teams look pretty strong right now overall. So I don't think it's the worst. Kind of similar to the Gladiators, but not quite as extreme, because there are more visible weaknesses there. But I think, they figured out that Mikey isn't the one. Bring in Kaluj, play Kaluj out. Hopefully, Proper gets better. And Shock, I think they'll rise back up. I don't think they'll stay too low. I was considering putting them as low as probably below Atlanta at some points, but I'm like, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because they've been good for so long. Above them, going to be the Houston Outlaws, finally breaking into the top 3 for maybe one of the first times this season. I don't remember. I don't really keep track of how much they're breaking in. But they look really good. Merritt and Pelican looking like probably the scariest damage duo in NA once again. And Merritt really impressed me on the Tracer. I didn't know he had that Tracer on him. He was going toe-to-toe with Proper. He was doing a lot of work. Of course, there is the elephant in the room. Yeah, they lose to Boston, but they were playing Doge. Never play Doge again. I never want to see him in. Dante, just not even like the individual gameplay, which was better with Dante. But as a team, Houston all seemed that they knew more what they were doing. The communication seemed better. Everything seemed better about them as a team. It's just an overall level up. You get Creative, who looked pretty good in there. Lastro looked great with some crazy 180 sleeps. Against Shock, we saw the individual play come to light. And we also saw their much better ability, as I mentioned, Shock, Sam not setting up those engagements quite as well with the EMP or the manual hack, whereas Pelican was doing that exceptionally well. Very on point with those EMPs for the most part. And whenever this fight's got a bit scrappier, Houston have that ability, they have that skill to rise to the occasion against a team like the Shock and out-mechanic them and get the wins that way too. So even though, Dante, he has a Doomfist, he has a Diva, as we see, he has an Orisa, that even if he only plays those 3, maybe Junker Queen sneaks in there too. She hasn't yet, but maybe she does. Houston, I think, could be a scary team, even with that limited flexibility, which isn't that limited, but it's definitely a little limiting. And now, final 2. the Dallas Fuel and the LA Gladiators. So Gladiators look to be back on top. They did get their wins over Florida and Vancouver. Florida's a pretty decent team, not bad by any means. And we saw that Florida had some kickback to them, and Gladiators handled it very well. They just look back on top. Shu's in, and again, I think this entire Gladiators roster kind of forms around Shu. He's able to get his crazy value on the Ana. Kester looks great on the Genji, of course. And Reiner is back and doesn't have to play the Junker Queen, which is exceptionally good for Gladiators. We see the Winston comp and the Doomfist comp to be their preferred composition, and honestly, I kind of agree with it. I think it's a great look for them. They were a bit hesitant to play the Sombra, it felt like, against the Florida Mayhem, so that kind of left them a little bit susceptible. But against Vancouver, they brought it back out. Happy looked pretty good on it. I don't think there's any problems with this team moving forward. Happy seemed to play well. I still question a little bit his Sombra potential because they seem to really not prefer it, but that could just be because Happy is so dominant on the hit scan at times that you don't think it's worth the risk of taking him off. So I see that, but like Gladiators seem to be back in full swing, and I'm not worried about them at all. Then we get the Dallas Fuel. We get Hanbin Gaming. He looks just as good as he did last stage, just as good as he did in the kickoff clash, if not better, on the Zarya. Edison and Doha being the DPS of choice, with Edison actually flexing over to the Genji too, which is a interesting thing I would not expect. I didn't know Edison had that Genji on him, and he looks great. The backline looks fantastic, but again, it is Hanbin spearheading this roster, just being a cut above every other Zarya player that there is. And they don't really have the same problems that, like, as I said about the Charge, how they struggle to control that high ground, because they have a really good Reaper in Edison who's able to control it very well, and if they need, they can run the Genji with it, and they can control the high ground in that way. So Dallas even going so far as to playing Circuit Royale with it, which I don't know if they do if they play a game against a team that's not Paris, but we'll see. I think Dallas, especially after last stage, just have to take that top spot, even with the lack of perceived flexibility. Fearless did come in and played some stuff, I believe, too. So, you know what? They have potential. They have some other tools in their shed. But for now, that's going to be the video. Again, like this video, subscribe, and yeah, deuces.